Welcome to the first Zoom Bible study of the new year, 2023. I look forward to the biblical journeys that we will take together. And thank you for taking the time to watch this video. And my prayer is that it will be a blessing to you. Now, normally I start the new year with some type of Bible study series. And no doubt I will definitely get to that. But tonight's lesson is a standalone study. Our church has been and is grieving as we deal with an unexpected and untimely death. So tonight I want to share a little biblical insight that I hope will be helpful as we as a community of faith and as individuals process grief and sadness. Grief, sorrow, and loss are issues that we are forever dealing with because death and loss are a part of life and will be so until that day when God promises to wipe every tear away, and a day when death, mourning, crying, and pain will be no more becomes a reality. The intention of tonight's lesson is to simply discuss insights from scriptures that provide a starting point. Dealing with grief and all the issues that come along with grief cannot be handled with a few Christian cliches or platitudes. There's a grieving process, and everyone processes their own grief at a different pace and in different ways. There are no cookie cutter answers. First, I want to start with a quote from C.S. Lewis in his book, A Grief Observed. It's a classic book. Grief is like a long valley, a winding valley. For in grief, nothing stays put. One keeps on emerging from a phase, but it always recurs. Round and round, everything repeats. Am I going in circles, or dare I hope I am on a spiral? But if a spiral, am I going up or down it? And again, tonight, I simply want to offer some thoughts that are worthy of reflection as one begins such a journey. One such starting point is that we need to know that it is okay to grieve. Scripture invites us to grieve. Still, though, knowing that, it still isn't easy. Sometimes the pain of losing a loved one, or the pain of going through a breakup or divorce, or the pain of isolation and loneliness, or the pain of sickness, or a number of different things can be so great that it is hard to put such grief and sadness or even anger into words. And when we find ourselves in such a season of grief and sadness, we need to remember that the Psalms can become a starting point. For the Psalms give us the language to speak the unspeakable. There are Psalms that deal with the feelings of unspeakable sadness and pain, and those Psalms are called the Psalms of lament. David Taylor, the author of Open and Afraid, the Psalms as a Guide to Life, says this: the Psalms of lament offer edited language to give expression to our unedited emotions. In other words, the Psalms can help us to pray. And the Psalms can give us the language we need when we can't come up with the words on our own. Eugene Peterson, in his book, Answering God, the Psalms as Tools for Prayer, reminds us that the Psalms teach us that prayer language comes out of this realness of life. Peterson writes, the primary language of prayer is people calling out their trouble, pain, guilt, doubt, despair to God. Their lives are threatened. If they don't get help, they will be dead or diminished to some critical degree. The language of prayer is forged in the crucible of trouble. When we can't help ourselves and call for help, when we don't like where we are and want out, when we don't like who we are and want to change, we use primal language. And this language becomes the root language of prayer. The Psalms give voice to those who are hurting. While everyone's journey is different and the exact circumstances that cause the grief are unique, nevertheless, there are some commonalities in grief. The Psalms remind us that others have been down the same road we find ourselves on. As one author wrote, we stand in a tradition as the people of God, and that tradition hands over to us good words. And in the Psalms, I believe God provides language for us when we can't come up with our own. When that happens, when we can't find our own words, let the Psalms be a starting point where they give voice to our lament and grief when we can't find the words for ourselves. And for anyone who has been told that praying a written prayer is somehow less of a prayer, remember that Jesus prayed the Psalms verbatim. Jesus prayed the Psalms as they were written. So much for any argument that written prayers are somehow inferior. Now, if you're looking for a starting point in dealing with grief and sorrow, just remember the Psalms give you a voice. And one example of this can be found in Psalms chapter 6, beginning at verse 6. I am weary with my moaning. Every night I flood my bed with tears. I drench my couch with weeping. My eyes waste away because of grief. They grow weak because of all of my foes. Now, I don't know about you, but that's a voice that comes from the Psalms, and it's pretty spot on with how sometimes we are feeling. Now, if you're looking for a list of Psalms to begin with, here's a little screen that you may want to pause and look at some more. Psalm 5, 6, 17, 22, 88, and 109. Those are personal Psalms of lament, and they're a good starting point. Now, there's many more, but that's a good starting point. And then some community Psalms of lament can be found in Psalm 44, 74, 83, 85, and 89. And again, this is only a beginning, but at least it gives you a little list of where to start. Now, in those Psalms I just have given you, some of those Psalms end with an affirmation of hope, while others do not. But obviously, they all belong in Holy Scriptures. And so that tells us that both types of Psalms, those that end with affirmation of hope and others that don't, they are useful to us depending on where we are at in our journey. Another lesson from the Scriptures when we are grieving in a season of loss is that it's okay to be honest with God. Our God is not fragile. Listen to the raw and honest language of the psalmist in Psalm 44, verses 22 through 26. And I'm going to read it from the Message Bible. But just listen to this raw language. Get up, God. Are you going to sleep all day? Wake up. Don't you care what happens to us? Why do you bury your face in the pillow? Why pretend things are just fine with us? And here we are, flat on our faces in the dirt, held down with a boot on our necks. Get up and come to our rescue. If you love us so much, help us. The Psalms encourages us to be honest with God. But the Psalms are not the only place where we find such permission. The story of Job is another one. Now, that's a whole book that deals with the issue of suffering and dialogue with God and others about it. And at the end of the book, after God answers Job from a dramatic whirlwind, and after Job is satisfied with what he heard from God, we find these words in Job 42, verse 7. After the Lord has spoken those words to Job, the Lord said to Eliphaz the Temanite, my wrath is kindled against you and against your two friends, for you have not spoken of me what is right, as my servant Job has. Now, to get a little insight into what's going on here, I quote now Robert Alter, a Jewish scholar, and his commentary about this passage in Job. Though the Lord from the whirlwind roundly rebuked Job for his presumption, Job in the debate, unlike his three companions, had remained honest to his own observation of reality and his awareness of his own acts. So even in his presumption, he had spoken, quote unquote, rightly about God. In other words, he had clung to his integrity. So folks, it's okay to be honest with God. God invites that. And that leads us to the final point tonight. It's okay to be honest and to wrestle with the issues of grief, lament, and faith with God, because in doing so, we are with God. In all of his anger and grief and disgust and frustration, Job never ran from God. He kept engaged. The psalmists do the same. Jesus did too. So travel the long valley of grief and with all of its ups and downs, twists and turns with God, not apart from God. The Lord is indeed our shepherd, as another psalm, Psalm 23, teaches us. So let us travel on this journey with the one who is with us and the one who knows the way. And again, can't emphasize this enough. This is only the starting point. But I hope that tonight's lesson has been helpful in some way. If I continue this topic for another lesson, I'll turn my attention to the truths of the New Testament that help us in this journey. For, as the Apostle Paul wrote, we do not grieve as those who are without hope. So until next time, God's abundant grace and peace to you.